Hello, my name is Bruce Boucher. I'm director of Sir John Soane's Museum, and it's my pleasure to introduce Bouke de Vries' Visions in Porcelain, a Rakes Progress. The exhibition is in response to one of our great treasures at the Soane Museum, which is Hogarth's series of 8 paintings depicting the rise and fall of Tom Rakewell. John Soane was a neoclassical architect who, in his very successful career, was determined to create what he would call an academy, whereby the over 40,000 objects that he had assembled initially for his own study and the study of his pupils would be open to the public, and it would combine painting, sculpture, and architecture to create, as he saw it, a union of these three in a kind of total work of art. I think what's perennially fascinating about the Soane Museum, both for me and I think the first-time visitor, is the sheer scale of Soane's collecting and his concern with creating an atmosphere which is never neutral. You go from light to darkness, you go from large rooms to small rooms to corridors, and it really has something of the 18th century concept of the sublime. Recently, when we have begun to mount exhibitions, we've seen it as part of the original mission of Sir John Soane, which was to make sure that this wasn't simply a house museum, a static collection of objects, but that people would come here and see the art, see the architecture, and be inspired to create new works. And this is exactly what Bouke de Vries has done. Bouke has created what I think is a wonderful three-dimensional embodiment of the rise and fall of the anti-hero of Hogarth's series, Tom Rakewell.
We are in the picture room at Sir John Soane's Museum, and I'm standing in front of 8 canvases by William Hogarth called A Rake's Progress, which Sir John Soane bought in 1802. A Rake's Progress describes the moral and physical journey of its hero or anti-hero Tom Rakewell and his long-suffering lover, Sarah Young. Hogarth presents the consequences of Tom's moral choices, which are profligacy, social climbing, extravagance, debt and gambling, as being degradation, shame, madness, and ultimately death. Tom's trajectory is one that he chooses not to arrest. At various points he has the option to change his ways, to be rescued by Sarah Young, and because he doesn't elect to be redeemed by her, ultimately the outcome is already written from the start. The story starts where Tom inherits a great fortune from a miserly father, and then proceeds to start spending it in great style when he sets himself up in his own home, before really starting to fall in his moral choices, as we see him in a brothel. By the 4th painting, he's already beginning to come unstuck. You can see him here, arriving for a public event at St James's Palace and being arrested for debt by bailiffs. And we're actually only halfway through the series and it's already going wrong. Here we have scene 5. He's trying to recover his fortunes by marrying an old woman for her money. In scene 6, we see him already losing a second fortune, that woman's money. He's at the forefront here of a gaming house in Covent Garden, having just staked everything on the last throw of the dice and lost. Over here, he's in the Fleet prison for debtors, where he's having to stay whilst he tries to find a way to pay his debts. We see him here at the point at which he's descending into madness, and in the final scene, he's in Bedlam, the institution for the insane, with Sarah Young crying as he possibly breathes his last breath. In terms of where A Rake's Progress sits within Soane's collection, it's clearly something that he perceived as modern. When he first hung the works at his country house in Pitshanger, it was described as being in a room with modern masters, which we believe are 2 Turner watercolours, so that Hogarth and Turner are being grouped together, being perceived by Soane as being modern works of art. And in fact, for Soane to own this contributed to the rehabilitation of Hogarth's perception as a good painter. And I think Soane would have been really content to be perceived as a connoisseur at the forefront of that debate.
It's wonderful to be here in your studio today, Bouke, and to have a preview of the descent of Hogarth's Rakes Progress seen through your eyes. It's a phenomenal body of work. Why Hogarth, and why respond in the way that you did?
Well, when I came to London 40 years ago now, when I discovered Hogarth, and actually I discovered them first in the Soane Museum because I had a friend who told me to go there when it was still pretty much undiscovered little treasure. And I liked the way he tells a story through his paintings, which is totally original, something I didn't know about in Holland. It's irony, and I think it's a sort of forerunner of cartoons, graphic novels, all these things. I love stories, I love history. I like looking back and bring it forward and update it and put my spin on it.
But this is Hogarth's story, isn't it?
His stories are universal stories, and I think they still are relevant for us today. I find these stories so rich, and they're humorous, and they appeal to me. And when I was thinking, can I do something for the Soane Museum, my first thought was Hogarth and that story. And then I thought, how can I put my twist on it?
And for me, your narrative that you bring is much more about the decay and the fragmentation, which is so quintessentially you. Everything slowly, beautifully falling apart.
But it's also the story of the Rake. It's called the Rakes Progress, but it's really the Rake's degradation.
Yes, exactly.
And I thought that would really transfer really well in the way I approach the things with decay in the ceramics.
But for someone who actually started their life with ceramics, repairing things that were broken, you seem to take a perverse pleasure in destroying things as well.
Yeah, but I don't really destroy them. I always use historical objects that are broken already. I don't go around smashing beautiful 18th century vases. I couldn't even afford to do that. It would also be disrespectful to do that. But for this one, I made new vases, and for this, I thought it was fair. If I make them, I'm allowed to break them.
And now you still, retain a little bit of the restoration work alongside the making of your own work. Do you think it's important to have both those things happening at the same time?
For me, it is. But I'm become much more selective on the work that I take on. I still work for some clients that I worked for right from the beginning, so it's loyalty. But then also when I get amazing projects coming along, and you can't say no to it. You just have to do it.
And is there something that happens in your head about Bouke the artist and Bouke the restorer, that you approach the work in a different way when it's restoration?
Well, in a way, when I'm an artist, the ceramics is a servant to me. But when I'm a restorer, I'm a servant to the ceramic.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Because I have to not put anything of myself in the restoration work. There's no space for that. I'm trying to follow the integrity of the original piece on how it was made.
So the artist ego is sublimated.
Yes, but it's not a problem.
I'm also thinking about contemporary artists that use found objects. It seems to me that you come out of that tradition as well. You work with something that's, well, you normally work with something that's already there, but on this occasion, you're actually making something new. I mean, talk me through the individual pots and how you move from one side to the other.
We started with the 8 paintings, so there had to be 8 vases, and I started with, the story starts with him inheriting the money. And so we start with a perfect vase and in a really light celadon. I've taken the shape of the baluster vase, which would have existed at the time of Hogarth's painting. And celadon would have been also something that they would have known at the time. But what I found so interesting about the celadon is you can make it into a color range. So apart from the vases degrading, the color and the story goes darker, and each vase goes darker as the story goes along, and ends up with a very dark green-brown celadon when he's all broken up in the madhouse.
I think the second and the fourth one are just stunning, and they really give me a sense of air that sits within them all. It's almost as if they become breathing, sort of living objects.
On vase 5, he marries the rich widow for her money. When after he's gone bankrupt in vase 4, Kintsugi seemed the whole appropriate material to use, sticking his life back together with her money.
And what about the rivets?
The rivets. So in vase 7, he is arrested and taken to prison. And I'm showing that here, where he's sort of, his body is sort of locked together. He's imprisoned by the metal staples, which is an old restoration technique from the 18th and 19th century. And over the past 30 years as a restorer, I've been taking rivets out of plates and doing a conventional repair so the rivets don't show anymore. And I've saved every rivet I've taken out of the pieces. When I came to this project, I have used them, and that's why they're all different sizes, all different shapes.
Wow. I mean, that's a classic Bouke de Vries, isn't it? In the way everything you use has a historical resonance in some way. Everything's got a story. So, and each one of those rivets will have come from a different piece of ceramic.
From a different piece of ceramic, where somebody in the 18th and 19th century, with just hand tools, drilled holes in porcelain, which is still hard to do today with an electric drill with special diamond coated. So I always think we underestimate the past so much, because these people had such skills to be able to do that.
And the last work in the series, that's a Bouke de Vries style that I'm much more familiar with. This way in which you contain something in the ghost-like shape of what was there before, all the fragmented pieces.
So I call them memory vessels.
Okay.
So the glass is a memory and a ghost of its original shape. So the glass is this cage, and there's his broken self inside it. And you know, this fascinating aspect that you see in the Rakes Progress painting, the final scene, where people go and visit Bedlam to look at the mad people. Just makes you shiver.
And of course, one of the great things about the Rakes Progress is the way in which the paintings are opened up. Yes. And you've chosen a very particular way of displaying the objects, almost in contrapposto to the works. So tell me about that.
Also, it's funny enough, the room, the Foyle room, is the sort of corresponding room on the other side of the house. So the same shape and same size. Displaying them on a horseshoe shape, because I wanted to bring people into the space, but also the pieces coming into the space rather than sitting in a line at the back.
You're seeing it face on, you're welcomed into this horseshoe, and behind each work, you've got almost like an altarpiece framework.
I wanted each one to have their own moment, and the celadon works really well against the gold. Also, the room is painted in green, so they might have gotten a bit lost. And also, I think the shields is sort of given them almost like a quality of an icon, like an altarpiece.
What do you want the audience to get from this work when they're standing in the space? Because they'll have Hogarth's Rakes Progress paintings on one side and yours on the other.
If you've seen the paintings, my vases make sense, but it does it in my way, and it's a reflection of me. And so I'm not telling only Hogarth's story, I'm also telling my story, because this is very much what goes on is a reflection of what I've been doing over the past 14 years as an artist.
What is so interesting as a connection between what Bouke does with ceramics and Soane's interest in ceramics is the cult of fragments. Soane collected fragments of classical sculpture, classical architecture, as a reference library for himself and for his pupils, but also in extrapolating them from their original setting, he's created a new combination of works. And I think with the visions in porcelain, the Rakes Progress, what Bouke is doing is by using his techniques of undermining the integrity of the original vase, he's conveying in 3 dimensions the tensions that existed in Tom Rakewell's life that eventually led him to buckle and collapse.